The New Year's Eve caller. It was New Year's Eve 2007. Emma, a 26-year-old graphic designer, had decided to stay home for a quiet celebration. Her friends were all out at a crowded downtown bar, but Emma wanted a peaceful evening to reflect on the year gone by and enjoy some wine and movies. As midnight approached, Emma made herself comfortable on her couch, wrapped in a blanket. She sipped her wine and watched the countdown on TV. Fireworks burst in the distance, illuminating her quiet suburban neighborhood. It was perfect, calm, cozy, and exactly what she wanted. Then, her phone rang. Emma glanced at the clock. It was 12:03 a.m. She didn't recognize the number, but assuming it might be a friend calling to wish her a Happy New Year, she picked up. "Happy New Year," she said cheerfully. There was silence on the other end. "Hello?" Emma said, her smile fading. Finally, a voice, a low, raspy whisper, came through. "Happy New Year, Emma." Her blood ran cold. The voice was unfamiliar, and the way it said her name felt wrong, like it was savoring each syllable. "Who is this?" Emma asked, trying to sound assertive but feeling her voice shake. "You shouldn't leave your curtains open," the voice replied. Emma's heart stopped. She quickly turned to look at the window behind her. The curtains were, in fact, wide open, and the dim glow of the streetlights illuminated her living room. She dropped her phone and rushed to pull the curtains shut. Her hands were trembling as she locked all the doors and windows in the house. When she finally picked up her phone again, the call had ended. She called her best friend, Sophie, who was still at the bar. Trying to sound casual, Emma asked if anyone there might have been playing a prank. Sophie assured her it wasn't anyone she knew and offered to come over, but Emma declined, saying she'd just go to bed. She tried to shake off the unsettling call, telling herself it was probably just a random prank, but she couldn't sleep. Every creak and groan of the house made her flinch. She kept checking her locks and peeking out the curtains, but the neighborhood was quiet. Around 3 a.m., Emma finally drifted off on the couch, clutching her phone. She woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing. Disoriented, she saw it was a text from the same unknown number. The message read, "I liked your red blanket. Happy New Year." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She looked down at the blanket wrapped around her. It was red. She hadn't moved since the call. In a panic, she dialed 911, explaining the situation to the dispatcher. Police arrived within 20 minutes and searched the property. Outside her living room window, they found faint footprints in the snow. They led from the street to her window, then to the back of the house, and stopped beneath her bedroom window. The officers reassured her they would patrol the area for the rest of the night, but Emma didn't sleep again. She never found out who the caller was or how they knew so much about her. Emma moved out of the house by February. To this day, she refuses to celebrate New Year's Eve alone. The Midnight Visitor. It was the new year of 2012 when Sarah, a 30-year-old woman living alone in a small, cozy apartment, found herself curled up on her couch with a book in hand. She had made no plans to go out for the night, preferring instead to enjoy a solitary evening of quiet reflection on the year that had passed. The streets below were bustling with the sounds of fireworks and revelers ringing in the new year. but Sarah felt content in her peaceful haven. As the clock struck midnight, signaling the beginning of 2012, Sarah made a toast to herself with a glass of wine, muttering, "Happy New Year," in a self-deprecating manner. Then she turned back to her book and sighed, her eyes scanning the page. Minutes later, her phone buzzed. A text from her friend, Rachel. "Happy New Year, girl. Hope you're having a blast." Sarah smiled at the message and quickly typed a reply, telling Rachel she was just enjoying a quiet night at home. As she hit send, she noticed a strange noise coming from the hallway outside her apartment door. It was a faint, scraping sound, like something dragging against the floor. She froze, heart pounding, and strained her ears to listen. The noise continued for a few seconds before stopping abruptly. Thinking it was just the building's old pipes or the wind, Sarah shrugged it off. She returned to her book, trying to calm her racing thoughts. But then came a knock at the door. 3 quick, deliberate raps. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It was unusual for anyone to visit her at this hour, especially on New Year's Eve when most people were out celebrating. She wasn't expecting anyone. She rose cautiously from the couch and walked toward the door, peering through the peephole. No one. Confused, Sarah hesitated for a moment before slowly unlocking the door and cracking it open just a few inches. There was no one in sight. That's when she saw it. A small, handwritten note was wedged into the door frame, as though it had been slipped there with great care. Her hand trembled as she pulled it free and read the words scrawled on the paper. "I'm watching you. Happy New Year." Chills ran down her spine. Her immediate thought was to call the police, but something in her gut told her to wait. Perhaps it was a prank, she reasoned. But then, the scraping noise returned, louder this time, almost as if it were coming from just outside her door. It was relentless, a gnawing sound, as if something was dragging itself along the hallway floor. Sarah backed away from the door, her pulse racing. She grabbed her phone, but before she could dial 911, the scraping stopped. There was a long pause, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and heavy. Sarah's stomach churned. The sound was growing nearer. Terrified, she bolted to her bedroom and locked the door behind her. She crawled into bed and turned off all the lights, holding her breath. She heard the footsteps approach her apartment door and stop. For what felt like an eternity, there was silence. Then came another knock. This time it was much softer. A single tap, 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 tap. But this time, it wasn't followed by anything. No scraping, no movement. Just the silence of the night. Unable to take it anymore, Sarah quickly dialed 911. The operator assured her that someone would be there shortly and advised her to stay on the line. She heard the distant sound of sirens, growing louder as they neared her building. When the police arrived, they searched the entire building, but found nothing out of the ordinary. No signs of forced entry, no one lurking in the halls. Just an eerie quiet that made Sarah's skin crawl. The officers told her they would patrol the area for the rest of the night and advised her to stay with a friend or family member until they could investigate further. Though Sarah moved in with a friend that night, She could never shake the feeling that someone was still watching her. The strange knocking and scraping noises continued to haunt her, especially on quiet nights when she was alone. To this day, Sarah never fully understood what happened that night. She moved out of the apartment the following year, but she couldn't help but wonder if the figure in the hallway was still out there, watching and waiting. And she never, ever spent another New Year's Eve alone again. The Phantom Celebration. It was New Year's Eve in 2005, and Mark, a 28-year-old man, had just moved into an old Victorian-style house he had recently purchased on the outskirts of town. He had been looking for a fresh start after a tough year, and the house, with its charming quirks and historical appeal, seemed like the perfect place to begin anew. He wasn't particularly superstitious, but there was something about the house's age, over a century old, that made him feel uneasy. Despite that, he was determined to make it his home. The night of December 31st arrived, and Mark decided to stay in, preparing for a quiet evening to reflect on the year. The house was drafty, the kind of place where the wind howled through the cracks, but Mark found comfort in its stillness. He lit a fire in the hearth and settled into his armchair with a glass of whiskey. As midnight approached, he glanced at the clock and thought about making a toast to the new year. He stood up, stretching, and suddenly noticed a strange, faint sound, a music box playing from somewhere in the house. The soft, tinkling melody filled the air, and it was almost as though it was echoing from the walls themselves. Confused, Mark walked toward the sound, which seemed to be coming from the upstairs hallway. He made his way through the dark house, his footsteps creaking on the wooden floors. As he reached the foot of the staircase, the music stopped. He paused, wondering if it was just his imagination. Probably just the wind, he muttered to himself, though his heart was racing. He turned to walk back into the living room, but as soon as he did, the door to the basement creaked open, sending a chill down his spine. Mark hesitated, feeling a strange compulsion to investigate. He approached the basement stairs slowly, the darkness below swallowing all light. Just a pipe or something, he thought, trying to reassure himself. But as he leaned closer, he noticed something he hadn't seen before, an old brass key hanging from the doorknob. It was strange because Mark was certain the door had been locked when he moved in. There was no reason the key should have been there. Suddenly the music began again, this time louder, as if it was coming from deep within the house. Mark turned toward the source, but the noise seemed to come from all directions at once. He couldn't tell where it was coming from, downstairs, upstairs, or within the very walls of the house itself. With a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread, Mark decided to go upstairs and investigate the source of the music. As he ascended the staircase, he noticed something that made his blood run cold, a faint figure standing at the top of the landing. It was a woman, her back to him, wearing an old-fashioned dress and with her hair up in a bun. The woman appeared to be looking out of the window, her form translucent, almost ghostly. Mark froze, unable to move or speak. The woman didn't acknowledge him, her form unmoving. as if she hadn't noticed his presence. "Hello?" Mark whispered, his voice barely audible. There was no response. With his heart pounding in his chest, Mark backed away, his mind racing to explain what he was seeing. But the moment he turned to leave, the woman slowly turned toward him. Her eyes were hollow and dark, the expression on her face cold and distant, and then, with a faint whisper, she said, "Welcome to my home." The words seemed to echo in his mind, drowning out everything else. Mark stumbled back, tripping over his own feet, and rushed downstairs to the living room. The music stopped abruptly, and the house fell silent. Mark's heart raced as he tried to process what had just happened. Was it a hallucination? Was he simply imagining things? He glanced at the clock. It was 11:59 p.m. A shiver ran down his spine as he realized that it was almost midnight, the moment when the old year ended and the new one began. Just then, he heard it again, the soft tinkling of a music box. He rushed to the window and looked outside, half expecting to see something or someone standing in the yard. But all he saw was the dim glow of streetlights casting long shadows across the empty street. When the clock struck midnight, the entire house seemed to shake, as though it were alive. Mark could feel it in his bones. The air was thick with an energy he couldn't explain. And then, through the floorboards, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and heavy, walking through the hallway above. Mark rushed to the door and fled into the night, too terrified to stay another moment in that house. As he stood on the front porch, he looked back at the house. For a brief second, he thought he saw a figure standing in the upstairs window, the same woman, staring out into the darkness. Mark never returned to the house. It was sold months later, but no one who lived there after him ever stayed long. The music box, the footsteps, and the strange apparition of the woman lingered in the memories of everyone who encountered the place. And it was said that on New Year's Eve, if you were near the house, you could still hear the haunting melody drifting through the air. Mark would never forget that night. The phantom celebration that he had unwittingly joined would stay with him forever.